That may be the greatest catch I've ever seen in my life.
Okay, so after the NFL draft, I mean, it looks like Trey Sermon is probably the most polarizing rookie in Dynasty. I mean, you have him in a range where you really can't put him in the same tier as a Travis Etienne, a Najee Harris, or a Javonte Williams, but he is clearly the best running back out of that group, and he ends up falling in that tier of just those wide receiver twos. And a lot of the times you're facing the question, okay, do I draft Trey Sermon? Do I draft Elijah Moore? Do I draft Trey Sermon? Do I draft Terrace Marshall? And really, all of those players are in that giant tier. So what I'm going to try to do here is I'm going to try to talk about why I think that you should be avoiding Trey Sermon in certain situations. And if you were looking for an elite ceiling, if you're looking for a player that could possibly just say triple his dynasty value by this time next offseason, then maybe in that scenario, you go out and target Trey Sermon. And I know this is going to be a weird video, but we talk Dynasty all the time over on Patreon, and y'all know once you send me your teams to get written up in depth over on Patreon, my first question all the time is, hey, I need everything you can give me with the league settings. I need how many teams, I need the scoring, I need the starting lineup requirements, because that's going to completely change not only our entire roster construction strategy, but more importantly, it's going to change how we are actually attacking these 2021 rookie drafts. So please, guys, if you join Patreon and you want to send me your team for that in-depth write-up, make sure you are including all of those settings, because it's going to be crucial in how I try to advise you to attack your rookie drafts. And also, please stick around to the end of the video, because I think that this one should be very useful if you're trying to determine whether or not to draft Trey Sermon. But yeah, that's it. Go down there, drop a like, leave a comment, subscribe to the channel. It helps us out a ton. Outside of that, I really don't have any other announcements to make. And let's just jump into it with Trey Sermon. And if we are going through and looking at the prospect profile of Sermon, I mean, he was a 4-star guy coming out of high school. And I know a lot of people really hate that I ever talk about high school recruit rank, but it actually matters for these running backs. This is something that I've referenced multiple times now, that I told you all a couple semesters ago. I took that biostatistical analysis class, and I pretty much got I got a stern talking to based on the fact that we were supposed to be looking at RNA sequences. We were supposed to be trying to come up with our values and use our data sets with that. And instead, I went and, of course, turned it into a Dynasty fantasy football project where we looked at the amount of impact that you had from high school recruit rank at the running back and wide receiver position, translating over to actual fantasy football success in the NFL. And like I've said before, I mean, usually the running backs that are going to be very successful in the NFL, those are the guys like Ezekiel Elliott, like Travis Etienne. I mean, these players that were top prospects coming out of high school. I mean, they've been on the radar for a while. Of course, at the wide receiver position, it's a little bit different. But I think that it's a box to check. Now, it's very unimportant. It is a very small box, but you would rather see these running backs have that pedigree coming out of high school, going into college than not. And Trey Sermon does give you that. Now, Trey Sermon's a little bit harder to evaluate because he did stay in college all 4 years. And after his third season at OU, he did transfer over to Ohio State. I'll get into why he did that later on in the video. Now, something I want to point out with Trey Sermon is the fact that there are two main thresholds he does not reach if we are talking about the thresholds we defined in our Dynasty Rookie Draft Guide that should come out later this month on Patreon. And that is his size, and that is his speed. So he ran a 4.61 40-yard dash at the NFL Combine. And what we did over for that Dynasty Rookie Draft Guide is we essentially looked at what makes a top 12 running back. What are some minimum thresholds, some minimum bars that you have to expect your running back coming out of college to be able to reach if he wants to have that ceiling to hit the top 12. And one of the thresholds is you needed to see a 4.60 40-yard dash. Now, Trey Sermon barely misses it to the point where we can say, I mean, he's pretty much at the threshold. This is the same case with Javonte Williams as a quick side note. But size is, I don't want to say a major concern with Trey Sermon, but you have to look at it and you have to go, okay, does he have the frame to be a 3-down workhorse guy like an Ezekiel Elliott, like a Dalvin Cook? I mean, he is 6 foot, 215 pounds. And with that Dynasty Rookie Draft Guide, we really talk about the importance of size mattering for the amount of touches you can expect per game. And more importantly, instead of looking at the weight, instead of looking at the height, you want to be making sure that you're looking at the BMI. And this is how you're going to identify running backs like DeAndre Swift. While maybe they're not massive players, we know that if you're looking at the BMI, they're going to get credit for being a little more stocky. They're going to get credit for having that muscle built up where they can take those hits. Now, Trey Sermon doesn't come close to meeting the minimum threshold with his BMI. He's actually only in the 29th percentile. Now, with Sermon, he does hit the threshold for being a great receiving running back, and more importantly, he hits the minimum threshold of getting the NFL draft capital that we are looking for. Now, not only does he get the draft capital that we are looking for on being a day 2 pick, but more importantly, we actually saw the 49ers decide to trade up for Trey Sermon. And this is something that we talk about a lot. I mean, it is a major difference in looking at a player, just say like a Michael Carter Jr., quote unquote, falling to the Jets at the beginning of the 4th round, even though they didn't think it was a priority to have to go out there and have to trade up for him. With a player like that, a lot of the times just NFL teams are looking at it and going, you know what, this is the best player on our board. Maybe he doesn't fit our system right away. Maybe we just take the best player, take the talent where we see fit. But in the case of Trey Sermon, you had this team going and trading multiple 4th round picks to go up there and draft Trey Sermon with the 24th pick in the 3rd round. Now, this is significant because this tells us that there were multiple people in on the front office that were just watching Trey Sermon fall down the NFL draft board and going, hey, he's a perfect fit for our system. He is someone that we have a plan to do something with day 1. So you go, you see that move up. This is something similar that you saw with Jonathan Taylor last year. This is something similar to what you saw with Alvin Kamara in the 3rd round coming out of Tennessee way back in the 2017 NFL draft class. Now, with Trey Sermon, even though we've already identified the fact that he doesn't hit the minimum thresholds for his speed or his size, yet he does with his receiving capability and his draft profile, at that point we go, okay, this is probably an average running back prospect, but the thing here is Trey Sermon goes to a fantastic situation. I mean, he goes to the San Francisco 49ers where, yes, it kind of looks like a crowded running back room where you have Raheem Mostert, you have Jeff Wilson, you have Wayne Gallman they brought in this offseason, and you also have Elijah Mitchell in this same NFL draft class coming in. But if you really dive into it and you really look at the team investment made into these running backs, I mean, nothing comes close to the team investment made into Trey Sermon. Okay, so with Wayne Gallman, he literally has $0 against the dead cap. You could see Wayne Gallman gone. I mean, he signed for less than $1 million in 2021. And I know that doesn't sound like much, but if you look at actual NFL contracts, that is pretty much nothing. Then you have Elijah Mitchell, who was selected in the 6th round of this last year's NFL draft. Then you have Jeff Wilson, who does have $2 million against the dead cap. So I think Jeff Wilson is actually the safest running back to be on this depth chart going into week 1. Now, Raheem Mostert, a running back that I actually said I did not mind investing into going into the NFL draft, and this is something I just got completely wrong. We were looking at this situation by San Francisco. We were looking at the fact that they gave up so many draft assets to move up to that number 3 overall pick, and we went, you know what? Running back is a luxury. I think that San Francisco is going to decide to pass on the position, and I thought that Raheem Mostert actually had that safe starting job locked up. And I was wrong. That's all I have to say here. I mean, he is owed $3.6 million this year, but if you look into it, only $400,000 of that is against the dead cap. So if we get into a scenario where they really like what they see from Trey Sermon in rookie camps, I mean, they could go and they could cut Mostert. I mean, if they don't have faith in him, which it doesn't really look like they do by coming in and bringing in Wayne Gallman, by trading up for Trey Sermon, by drafting Elijah Mitchell all at the same time, I mean, I think you have to be a little bit worried, and this is something that I just have to hold the L. This is something I got insanely wrong. We were looking at Raheem Mostert as an extremely deep dynasty stash this offseason. Yet, I will say, we got him right last offseason where we were completely avoiding him. It looks like we should have just stayed course with what our initial plan was. I just thought that this team was a little less likely to bring in some running backs than I guess they actually were. Now, if we go through and if we look at what Trey Sermon did with his production profile through his college career, it isn't fantastic, but there are some reasons behind this. And a lot of the times, I mean, it was just Trey Sermon playing on some rosters that had great running backs with him. I mean, if we go through playing for both Oklahoma as well as Ohio State, he had some great running backs in his backfields. I mean, if we go to his true freshman season at Oklahoma in 2017, he did average 9.5 carries, a little over a reception a game as well, close to 70 yards a game. And I think if you take in the context of this situation where Rodney Anderson was also on the same roster, I mean, that is an impressive season. Now, if you don't know who Rodney Anderson is, I mean, he was a 4-star prospect. Yes, he really showed so much talent when he could get going and when he could play. But the problem with Rodney Anderson is he simply could never stay healthy. I mean, he had multiple ACL tears through both his college and his NFL career. He actually stuck around on the Cincinnati Bengals for, I believe, 2 seasons. And trust me, I had Rodney Anderson on so many taxi squads. I mean, if you play in a Flock Patreon Dynasty League, I mean, you can go through, look at the league history, and I bet you I had Rodney Anderson stashed away because he was a running back that profiled to be a 3-down guy. He was a running back that looked like he had a lot of talent. He could just really never stay healthy. So nonetheless, Rodney Anderson actually led this team in rushing in 2017. So it was impressive that you had a true freshman Trey Sermon coming in and getting that immediate workload and having success with that workload back in 2017. Now going into 2018, this is where I thought that we were going to see the bump up because Rodney Anderson, I mean, he was not playing many games on this roster. Yet even with Rodney Anderson going down to injury, you actually had another running back just waiting in the wings here for Oklahoma. You had Kennedy Brooks, who was a 4-star guy coming out himself, still a very high pedigree running back that also has a tremendous amount of talent. Now, even with that, Trey Sermon was able to take a step up with his usage up to about 12 carries a game, almost a reception a game, and bumping it up to 80 yards at the same time. Now, I will point out, guys, this is 2018, so let's remember who the quarterback is for Oklahoma. The quarterback then is Kyler Murray. Kyler Murray obviously not going to be looking to dump the ball off to the running backs whenever Kyler Murray is that elite rushing quarterback himself. So that's something you always need to take note of. When you have those elite quarterbacks with mobility in college, really a running back check down is going to be the last thing they're doing. So I will say, please overlook the fact that he does not hit a reception a game this year, but you do need to keep in mind that the elite yards per carry number can be attributed somewhat to the fact that Kyler Murray is such a threat running the football that when he went to hand it off to Trey Sermon, you did have those opposing linebackers kind of freezing. They really couldn't crash on the edge to go after Trey Sermon. But nonetheless, going into 2019, this is where it all falls off. This is why you actually see the transfer, because not only do you have Kennedy Brooks seeing a decent amount of volume in this offense, you also have Ramondre Stevenson coming in, and we know that Stevenson is a player that just got drafted by the New England Patriots this year. He's a player that should also have a role in the NFL. So given the fact that Brooks and Stevenson were both high pedigree players themselves, I mean, this was just a nasty backfield situation where Trey Sermon was only able to account for 5.4 carries, almost a reception a game, and a little over 45 yards. Now, I will point out the fact that the efficiency with his touches, they were elite. But the problem was there were just too many running backs in this backfield where he really couldn't take control of the job. So he decides to transfer over to Ohio State, talking about teams that have good running backs. I mean, Master Teague is at Ohio State. Master Teague is a 4-star prospect himself. Yet despite that, you finally have Trey Sermon getting the majority of usage in that Ohio State offense, where he is averaging close to 15 carries a game, averaging a little over a reception and a half for 120 total yards a game. So incredible efficiency. And I want to point out the fact that in 2020, you had him playing with Justin Fields. Justin Fields, very similar to what we said with Kyler Murray, was not a quarterback that you should be expecting to dump the ball off consistently. That's a quarterback that if his first, second read isn't really there, then he can tuck it and run. He's not going to be going through his progression like a Mac Jones to find Najee Harris coming out of the backfield. No, he has some dynamic ability himself. So the fact that he is never able to eclipse 2 receptions a game isn't too big of a deal for me. I like how he was used in the receiving game. So I think we can call him a running back that was highly efficient in college, that did get the receiving down usage that you would want to see. Now, the receiving totals weren't necessarily there, but that was more so due to the fact that he was playing with great rushing quarterbacks every single season throughout his college career. So with Trey Sermon, I mean, you're looking at it and you're going, okay, he's someone that if he can take control of the San Francisco backfield, I mean, I think you could be looking at a guy stepping up into a role where he could eventually be a low-end running back 1 in fantasy. And if you're able to draft a low-end running back 1 in fantasy in the second round of a Superflex rookie draft, I mean, that is how you triple your investment. That is how you have that elite ceiling. But at the same time, you can paint a picture where maybe this backfield is just a complete mess. Maybe Trey Sermon really is never able to get more than 12 touches a game, and Trey Sermon caps out at being a running back 3 in fantasy and really not helping your team with some sporadic plays here and there. Another important thing to mention is the fact that he's going to be playing with Trey Lance. So while Trey Lance has that same Kyler Murray type ability where you should be freezing the opponent linebackers, at the same time, he's not going to be looking to check the ball down that much to the running backs coming out of the backfield. But nonetheless, I think we can say Trey Sermon, great ceiling, low 4. So what kind of dynasty leagues do you want to be targeting him in? So I will say immediately, if you're playing in an 8 or a 10-man dynasty league, or if you're even playing in a 12-man dynasty league, but you have very shallow starting lineups, maybe you only start 8 players or less, I mean, that is the format you need to be chasing Trey Sermon, because that is the format where you need to make sure that you are accessing elite upside with the prospects you're bringing in. Yet, if you're playing, just say in a Dynasty Flock League, on the other hand, where we go a lot deeper, if you aren't used to a Dynasty Patreon Flock League, I mean, the majority of them have a starting lineup anywhere from 11 to 12 players. They are all 12-man leagues, and some of them are even best ball, so depth is especially important. In a format like that, that's when I think you go with that wide receiver 2 tier. That's when I think you're drafting the Jalen Waddle, the Terrace Marshall, the Rondell Moore, the Elijah Moore, whatever your preference is out of that wide receiver group. That's where I think you take them over a Trey Sermon. But like I said, if you're playing in a shallower format where it's possibly only an 8-man league or a 10-man league, or you have an extremely small starting lineup, that's where I think you should be targeting Sermon, because I truly do think he has that elite upside, but he does have a very low floor at the same time. So I want to make sure that everybody knows it's not black and white. Everybody knows that it's very rarely you can look at a player like Trey Lance and you can go, hey, we're targeting him in every format. I don't care what is going on. This is such a great prospect compared to his dynasty price. I don't have that same feeling with Trey Sermon. I think you have to go through and you have to try to evaluate how you try to win your league, whether that's through depth or whether that's through those top-end studs. Now, thank you guys. I really hope y'all enjoyed this video. I really hope y'all got something from it. Of course, go down there, drop a like, leave a comment, subscribe to the channel. It helps us out a ton, and I'll see y'all with the video tomorrow. Thank you so much for everyone supporting the show on Patreon. And Dominic, Jim, Carl, Jesse, Tyler, Eric, Colby, Cameron, Mike, and Marcus, thank you guys.